Hello and welcome to my review for Total War Rome 2's Rise of the Republic Campaign Pack. Rise of the Republic released on the 9th of August 2018 and is currently available for Windows PC. Apparently it was listed for Mac and that has since been removed, so as of recording, this is currently a Windows-only DLC. Now, Rise of the Republic shifts the year back to 399 BC, where Rome is but a small fledgling nation vying for control of the Italian peninsula. The DLC comes with a new theatre of war, which represents a focused-in view of Italy and the surrounding islands, as well as a small section of Carthago in Africa. Now, overall, the map has around 110 settlements, which are quite densely packed together. Usually any army has coverage of about 2 or 3 of those settlements if you select them pretty much anywhere on the map. This does change a bit when dealing with the north, as settlements up there are generally a little bit more spread out, but this is the exception to the rule. The map is really very pretty to look at and move around in, with dozens of monuments, ruins, temples and outcroppings dotted around for flavour. Unfortunately, these don't show up in battle, but they add nice atmosphere to the campaign nonetheless. Now, one effect that was quite irritating was the amount of cloud cover present on the map. Clouds both low and high would sweep across my screen regularly, blocking around 70% of the screen at times, causing me to zoom in and rotate around just to get an idea of what I was looking at. Other than that, I have to say the map was quite enjoyable to play on, with lots of mountain ranges, rivers, lakes, as well as wide open areas and long travel times at sea to help provide a more interesting campaign experience at times. I do however feel like there are too many towns for the amount of armies present on the map with the current in-game economy, as most of these towns go unmanned, leading to a lot of auto-resolving, a problem with the Grand Campaign that is definitely heightened here. Rise of the Republic has 9 playable factions across 5 culture groups. The cultures are generally quite familiar both in terms of playstyle and their roster, largely dominated by Greek and Hellenic influences, with Italian nations fielding a little bit more swords than the Greek spears, and barbarian nations having stronger cavalry and more aggressive infantry. Though a lot of the factions are seen in other campaigns, such as the Samnites, the Veneti, the Inasubres, Etruscans, and the Senones, this is the first campaign where they're actually playable, and they have their own unique rosters, different than that of their other campaigns. That being said, the rosters are quite small, with most factions having around 14 units in total, with only about 5 of them being truly unique to this campaign. Now, each faction also has their own government mechanic. For Rise of the Republic, switching governments has been changed to some sort of buff. For instance, Rome can give a general the dictator trait for a few turns in times of need. The Samnites can spawn a full army, and Taurus can instantly complete a technology. Each faction is something along those lines, whereby you pay a sum of gold, get an instant effect, and then have to wait on a cooldown to do it again. It's a nice replacement for the government system, and it's the main crux of what's different between the factions in the game. I personally didn't really use it all that much, but depending on your playstyle I can see how you would get some use out of it, and from what I could tell, the enemy AI never seemed to employ these effects. It's only for you as the player to utilize. For instance, when attacking the Samnites, I feared they'd invoke their full stack army against me, but they never did. Now, in terms of new mechanics, or different playstyles on the campaign, some factions have received quite a bit of attention, while most factions are relatively untouched from the normal style of gameplay. For instance, Tarchuna, or the Etruscans, they can't upgrade any of their buildings. That's a big change. They instead upgrade their province capitals, which blanket upgrade everything else. This means that cities are much more valuable to the Tarchunians than smaller regions, and they need to bank a lot of money before they can upgrade. The buildings they can upgrade, such as ports, offer a lot of options to specialize them how you want. Now, if we compare this to, say, Taurus, the faction that I played the most, they have no unique building mechanics and a very limited set of options when it comes to building. Their ports, for example, are a linear upgrade. Pretty boring. The same is true for pretty much all the other factions. No other factions change how you build, recruit, fight, or develop, so as a long-time player, the gameplay is starting to feel pretty stale at this stage. Now, I was surprised by this. With Empire Divided, the previous DLC pack, Creative Assembly at least made the attempt at introducing something new, the banditry mechanic, and several new building chains to go with it. This isn't present in this campaign, and no new core mechanic has been introduced for the DLC. Releasing a DLC 5 years on from the release of the game probably should have some new and interesting mechanic to play around with, but you won't find that in the Rise of the Republic campaign. Now, I don't want to blame the DLC for something that just isn't there, rather I usually just review what is there. However, the feeling of familiarity and repetition set in almost immediately because of how the gameplay feels. Again, without new building chains to explore or any long-term mechanics that change how you play, You'll build your provinces the same way you do in the Grand Campaign. You'll manage your food, squalor, and public order the same. You'll manage and recruit armies the same. You'll do diplomacy the same. You'll research technologies the same. You'll trade the same. It gets tiresome really fast. Something that did breathe new life into the campaign was the area of recruitment system. This is present in other campaigns, but it's true for all factions in this campaign. Now what this means is that as any faction, you can take a region and recruit specialized units from that region. You'll find Latin infantry in Latium, Lucanian swords in Lucania, Campanian cavalry in Campania, and so on. Playing as Taurus, they have no sword infantry, so finding some Lucanian swords nearby was a huge boost to the army, and it gave me a kind of a gotta catch 'em all feeling to check every town to see what else I could get. Now unfortunately, while it was fun in the early game, towards the mid and late game, all the units tend to be of quite poor quality, so you never really have a reason to actually recruit them. I was hoping to find some elite units that required tier 3 settlements, but there were so few with that requirement, and the ones that did require that were often worse than my base unit, so in that regard, it seemed like a fun mechanic, but it was just balanced a little bit poorly in its current state. The Lucanian infantry I found were so powerful that I used them all the way to the end of the game, and I got them on turn 15 with a level 1 requirement, so I feel like they really need to be nerfed or locked behind a higher requirement. It is not good to be using one unit from the beginning of the game to the end. As with many of the latest DLC campaigns, Rise of the Republic features many dilemmas and event messages. Now, love them or hate them, they're here in full force with some really nice artwork. I normally find these to be busy work and kind of boring, but I really enjoyed the ones we got as Taurus. Taurus are supposed to be kind of like a Spartan colony, and we frequently got messengers from Greece asking for aid for the different city-states. We also got messages from Massalia dealing with trade and diplomats from Carthage trying to arrest one of our officials. I guess I just felt they were a little bit more practical and well written than the events in the past, and I got pretty engaged with them. However, over time, I started to just see the same events, which obviously causes a bit of fatigue as the outcomes never change. Now toward the end of the campaign, our choices for the affairs in Greece seemingly had long-term consequences and granted us different rewards, so that was really nice to see. Now if you ignore the events, you're probably not going to miss too much, but if you do play along with them, I think they can be quite entertaining here. Another interesting event is the migrating tribes. Every now and then you'll get a message that a tribe is passing through your lands or invading. Sounds quite cool, but essentially it just means that a full stack appears somewhere and they're usually at war with you, even if they're not in your lands. Now in that regard it felt a little bit cheap. Through no fault of your own, without warning, seemingly at any point in the map, deep in your empire or on the borders of the map itself, an army can just spawn and will attack you. I think in principle it's a nice idea, I mean the roaming tribes that is, but I'd rather, it be an actual invasion force of several armies or nations that roam around before they try and settle than just default go to war with you when they spawn. Either way, they're quite easily squashed and ultimately a bit forgettable. Last thing to mention are the technologies and the victory conditions. Now these are, pretty much as standard. The technology tree gave quite sizable technology, so I enjoyed progressing through it. You feel like you're getting something, but there's essentially no unit upgrades or anything unusual tied to it, so it does feel like a standard tech tree, albeit paced quite nicely. For victory, you typically need to own around 2/3 of the map and take a few key provinces, with the chapter objectives being paced pretty nicely as well, with sizable rewards for the side objectives. Now, a lot of people ignore the chapter objectives, but because this campaign lacked new and interesting mechanics, I felt like I needed some direction in what I was doing, and for the most part, the direction was pretty good and provided a nice enough challenge. Challenge is something that has to be brought up here as my final point. As is typical in Total War, the game becomes quite easy midway through the campaign. In Rise of the Republic, it becomes extremely easy after you secure your borders from the start. I'd say for me personally, I had absolutely no challenge whatsoever from turn 30 onwards. A lot of towns I came across were empty and had no garrison, and that's because the AI never converted the main settlement. This meant that I literally just clicked a town and walked into it. I think they still have this town actually, so I can't do it until I take that. Okay. The AI struggled to field armies, and when they did, they were almost always full of tier 1 units, even all the way to the end of the campaign. Now my economy started to steamroll around turn 60, and I eventually just paid to client slate everyone else that wasn't in the way of a victory objective. It really was one of the most empty campaigns I've played in a long time. Now I'm not sure what it is with Creative Assembly and Total War that they don't want to encourage more battles. There's barely ever any armies. Towns are all auto-resolved, as garrisons might as well not exist. Once you get 2 or 3 armies up and running, the game is practically over. It's a huge problem. And as nice for all the new features are, if the campaign is just empty and unchallenging, it's really hard to recommend it. It wasn't all easy though. One aspect that did provide an insane challenge was the politics side of the game. At first, playing on very hard, the debuff to politics is -25 to loyalty. Now for those unfamiliar, -10 is the number at which a civil war has a risk of occurring. Then you roll a random party trait on top of that. That could provide a further -10 potentially, which it did for me. So I was starting the game with a -35 loyalty to some of my parties. Now even with pretty much full knowledge of how to use the system, I just kept having civil wars around turn 20 and beyond. What made this especially difficult was the fact that a civil war army would spawn with elite troops that the player needs both a tier 3 building and a later technology to get, but somehow they field thousands of them with silver experience. I'm over here struggling to fight Carthage with bronze tier troops with fucking mud for weapons, and meanwhile the Civil War AI just invents future technology, trains, gets years of battle trained experts and acquires thousands in gold to destroy me. It's extremely frustrating to deal with it, and I got so tedious that I just had to lower the campaign difficulty to ignore the debuff. I really do feel like they need to rebalance that system, or at least lock Civil Wars behind a higher Imperium level. With more towns and generals, you can manipulate politics a lot more, but at the beginning of the game, you're at the mercy of just a few characters and some random traits. It's really not good. Now there's not much to talk about in the battle section, mainly due to the fact that there's just not that much changed. There's no new unit types, siege equipment, defenses, unit abilities, settlement maps, or music. It very much is just the battles as you know them, with familiar settlements, familiar music, and units that largely do the same things. There is actually one unit that has a new weapon, a sort of gauntlet mace-like weapon for the Aioli, so there is that. Now, a lot of the units look pretty cool, especially the Aioli and their funky hats. But there's also the occasional model that looks really out of place with like boxy clothes and armor that's just way too big for them. Now, I can't be sure, but I don't think there's any new head model, so expect to see the same faces as well throughout all the different cultures. That being said, there is actually a lot more individuality in the troops, with more color and detail placed on shield patterns, unique and detailed armor on helmets, that make the Romans, for example, feel a little bit less like the organized fighting force they would eventually become. It looks great in particular when a shield wall of painted and colourful Samnites march steadily towards the enemy. Now despite me saying that there's no new settlement maps in general, there is actually one new one, and it occurs when attacking Rome's last army. The city is destroyed by the siege of the first battle, and all that's left is the Capitoline Guard fighting to the death. It's a really cool contextual map, and after 1,000+ hours in Rome 2, I think it's the first time I've played a new map in that game, so even though, my battle was kind of underwhelming, it was still a joy to check out the map and figure out the new terrain. The last thing I need to mention is bugs. It just wouldn't be Total War Rome 2 without them. Now as of writing this review, I'm not sure, how much of the footage and replays I kept for examples of bugs, but believe me when I say, there was a lot. It was all streamed on Twitch, so you could go through it if you don't believe me. Now I fought around 40 battles in the latest update and patch, and I think almost every battle presented some sort of bug, be it a minor glitch on the walls of a settlement, or a huge game breaker, like a general's unit splintering off into 100 directions. Now I had long AI baggage trains come into the map, and stall as they approached, not moving up until I ran up to them and hit them, and I had general units being left at the edge of the map facing the wrong way as their army marched on without them. I had naval ships pull away from land with soldiers still on them jumping into the ocean. That's a fun Attila bug and a Thrones bug, so nice to see that retro ported into Rome 2. And one of the worst offenders was that I had units at sea sitting in the ocean refusing to land their ships, forcing me to wait out the 40-minute battle timer. Good thing I had a timer because it wouldn't have ended otherwise. Now I'm often told, oh, these are rare occurrences, they don't happen for me. Like I said, I had about 40 battles total with this DLC. I had minor bugs in every couple of battles and game-breaking ones every 20 or so, and that's just far too much in my view. I also don't do anything to encourage these bugs to happen, I just play the battles as normal. Now as for the new AI that has been marketed for the game, there are instances where the AI has performed well and decided to approach a city from multiple routes, definitely shaking up the gameplay a little bit, but there has also been times where, more often than not, they'll just charge cavalry head on into a phalanx, and it's usually their general, so it is very much still Rome 2. The free Ancestral update that dropped alongside this DLC is a really welcome update, especially for the quality of life changes and graphical improvements. I had said in a previous video that with the free update they guaranteed a purchase of the DLC for me, and that still remains true. I want to support the updates. That being said, this is a review of a product, and the free update is free, not part of this review. So I just want to reiterate that before we get to the verdict. I don't want to hear people saying like, oh, what about the family politics? It's not counted. It's free. Rise of the Republic delivers a more focused-in prequel campaign to Rome 2's Grand Campaign. The pack is a welcome addition to the game if you've been craving new content, but if you feel like you've got your fill of Rome 2, I can't say it really delivers any new gameplay experience. It just delivers kind of more of the same. The campaign itself can end up being extremely empty, with barely any battles being fought, and the balance of both politics and the area of recruitment units really does feel off to me. There is a nice amount of factions to play as, the government abilities are nice, the map is nice, the events are nice, and the general look and feel of the units are fine, but it really lacks anything to make it a truly unique or a must-have experience. That's all for my review of Rise of the Republic. If you like this review, consider liking this video and maybe sharing it with people you think may be interested, or on websites, forums, and groups that you think would dig it. Now, if you want more reviews like these, consider subscribing to the channel, and if you're passionate about these types of games like me and covering their smaller content drops, please consider supporting the channel either on Patreon or with a Twitch subscription. Unfortunately, I'm blacklisted from Creative Assembly, so I can't get these reviews out before the game's release, so I forfeit a huge portion of views and growth. The main motivator for covering these games at all are the likes on the video and my patrons asking me to cover it, so please consider helping the channel if you want more of this content. Either way, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.